Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a history so delightfully peculiar, it might just lull you into the deepest slumber. Imagine, for a moment, standing on the sun-baked banks of the Nile, the ancient world stretching out before you, the air thick with the scent of papyrus and drying mud. You hear the gentle lapping of water against the reeds, and perhaps a low, guttural rumble from the river itself. That rumble? Oh, just your friendly neighborhood Nile crocodile, gliding silently beneath the surface. Now, you probably won't survive this, but for the ancient Egyptians, these colossal reptiles weren't just fearsome predators. They were, in some truly astonishing ways, considered part of the domestic landscape, even, perhaps, pest controllers. Yes, you heard that right. Forget the sticky flypaper or the modern exterminator. The Egyptians might have had something far more scaly. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is for you right now in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're a farmer, living in a modest mud brick home, the kind of place where the line between inside and out is fluid. The Nile, your lifeblood, also brings with it an entire ecosystem of creatures, some welcome, some decidedly not. You're constantly battling. Weevils in the grain, mice in the pantry, snakes slithering into the shadows. And then, there's the distinct possibility of a scorpion scuttling across your floor. It's a constant, low-level war, waged with sticks, traps, and a healthy dose of superstition. But what if one of the most formidable creatures of the Nile could be, in some esoteric way, on your side? What if the very beast that strikes fear into the hearts of sailors and bathers could offer a peculiar kind of protection? It's not about keeping a full-grown, man-eating crocodile in your living room. No. Think smaller. Think juvenile. Think about the unique ecological niche these creatures occupied, and how ancient minds, deeply intertwined with the natural world, might have perceived their role in a way that seems utterly bonkers to us now. The sheer audacity of even considering such a thing is what makes this historical tidbit so wonderfully, sleepily intriguing. Historians still argue whether this was widespread practice or an isolated curiosity, but the whispers of crocodiles as a form of ancient pest control persist, a testament to the ingenious, sometimes bizarre, adaptations of human civilization. You imagine the rustle in the corner of your storeroom, the telltale squeak, and then a sudden, decisive snap. Problem solved. Probably. So, you're an ancient Egyptian, living your best life along the Nile, which, by the way, is less a river and more a superhighway of life, death, and everything in between. Every year, like clockwork, the inundation arrives, a slow, gentle swelling of the river that spreads nutrient-rich silt across the land. This is your lifeblood, your bread and butter, literally. You depend on it for everything, your crops, your water, even the mud bricks for your home. But this fertile bounty, this generous gift from the gods, comes with its own set of uninvited guests. We're talking about a thriving ecosystem that really enjoyed your food stores as much as you did. Imagine a quiet evening, the oil lamp casting flickering shadows, and suddenly, you hear that telltale skitter-scratch. A mouse, perhaps, or worse, a rat, bold as brass, eyeing your precious supply of dried fish. Your days are governed by the sun, by the rhythm of the river. You rise with the dawn, the cool morning air a brief respite before the sun begins its relentless climb. You might be tending to your flax fields, the plants swaying gently in the breeze, knowing that soon they'll be harvested for linen. Or perhaps you're working in the shade of a date palm, carefully cultivating your garden, which might include anything from onions and garlic to melons and figs. It's a life of hard work, yes, but also one deeply connected to the cycles of nature. And within these cycles, there are constant, small battles being fought. A beetle burrowing into your stored grain, a scorpion hiding in the cool shade of your pottery, waiting for an unsuspecting toe. You might even have scorpions seeking refuge from the heat within your very walls. Life is simple, but it's rarely quiet when it comes to the buzzing, scuttling, and slithering world around you. One mainstream historical fact to grasp is just how central the Nile was to every aspect of Egyptian life, from the smallest insect to the grandest pharaoh. Its rhythms dictated not just agriculture but the very calendar, dividing the year into 3 seasons: Ake, inundation; Parate, growth; and Shimu, harvest. This annual flood wasn't a destructive event, but a carefully observed, life-giving miracle. Without it, the civilization simply wouldn't have existed. And within this vibrant, fertile valley, the line between helpful and harmful animals was often blurred. That cat purring by your feet might be a beloved pet, but it's also your first line of defense against vermin. That ibis waiting in the marsh. A sacred bird, yes, but also a consumer of snakes and other small critters. It's a delightful thought, isn't it? How so many of these creatures served a dual purpose. Now for a quirky tidbit. Ancient Egyptians actually used a sort of proto-fly swatter made from palm fronds. Imagine swatting flies with a giant leaf. While perhaps not as elegant as our modern mesh, it certainly got the job done for a persistent pest. And yet, even with these simple tools, the sheer volume of insects and rodents must have been overwhelming. This is where the notion of bringing in a heavy hitter, something with more teeth, begins to emerge. Historians still argue whether the perceived benefits of a crocodile in pest control outweighed the considerable risks. Was it a rare, desperate measure, or a more common, if discreet, practice among certain segments of the population? The debates continue, keeping scholars up at night, unlike you, who should be drifting off peacefully. Just picture yourself there, the distant croak of a frog, the gentle murmur of the Nile, and the persistent hum of mosquitoes. Wait, maybe not that last one. With the Nile's generous overflow came not just fertile silt, but also a veritable symphony of tiny, uninvited guests. You're an ancient Egyptian, and frankly, pestilence is less a possibility and more a daily reality. Imagine a mosquito buzzing around your ear, not just an annoyance, but a potential carrier of disease. Malaria, for instance, was a very real threat, causing fevers and chills that could quickly incapacitate a farming family. You might try to swat it away with that palm frond, but for every one you miss, 10 more seem to arrive. It's an unending aerial assault, especially during the humid months after the flood. Then there are the rodents. Oh, the rodents. Mice and rats, nimble and audacious, were constant invaders of your precious granaries. You spend months toiling in the fields under the scorching sun, nurturing your barley and emmer wheat, only for a family of unwelcome furry squatters to gnaw through your stores. Not only do they consume what you've painstakingly grown, but they also contaminate it with their droppings, spoiling what little you have. And it's not just about food. Rodents carry diseases like bubonic plague, though the full understanding of such connections would be centuries away. You simply knew that where mice gathered, illness often followed. It was a subtle, insidious warfare, fought not with spears and chariots, but with gnawing teeth and silent scurrying. And let's not forget the creepy crawlies of the ground. Scorpions, with their ominous tails, would seek refuge in the cool, dark corners of your home. A sting from one of these could be excruciatingly painful, and in some cases, deadly, particularly for children or the elderly. You learn to check your sandals before you put them on, to inspect the corners of your sleeping mat. It's a habit born of necessity, a constant vigilance against tiny, venomous threats. Snakes, too, were a concern. While many were harmless, venomous cobras or vipers could strike without warning. You might step on one accidentally while walking through the reeds, or find one coiled in your firewood. The fear wasn't just of death, but of a prolonged, agonizing illness. One mainstream historical fact is that ancient Egyptians faced a myriad of health challenges due to their environment and the lack of modern sanitation. Diseases like schistosomiasis, caused by parasitic worms in the Nile, were widespread, leading to chronic illness. Medical papyri detail various remedies, some effective, many less so, for everything from fevers to skin conditions. This constant struggle against unseen pathogens and visible pests shaped much of their daily life and their ingenuity. Now, for a quirky tidbit. To ward off scorpions, some ancient Egyptians would place small statues or amulets of the goddess Serket, who was associated with scorpions and venomous creatures, near their beds or homes. It was a blend of spiritual protection and practical concern. Whether it actually worked is another question, but it offered a measure of comfort in a world full of tiny, dangerous things. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of certain diseases directly influenced specific architectural choices or daily habits, beyond what seems obvious. Did the sheer volume of pests push them to consider truly radical solutions? Or were these methods, like potentially using crocodiles, simply one-off experiments or symbolic gestures? The debate continues to gently hum along, much like those mosquitoes that might be lulling you to sleep right now. Just try not to swat them too vigorously. Given this constant onslaught of pests, you can imagine the ancient Egyptian mind wasn't just idly dreaming of pyramids. It was also thinking, quite practically, about how to keep the bugs and rodents out of their breakfast. Beyond the spiritual appeals to circuit or the practical palm frond swatter, they developed a surprising array of rudimentary pest control methods. You probably wouldn't find these in a modern hardware store, but in their context, they were quite clever. Consider the domesticated cat, for instance. This mainstream historical fact is a comforting one. The Egyptians loved their cats. These sleek, graceful felines weren't just cherished companions. They were highly effective rodent hunters. You'd see them slinking through the granaries, their eyes sharp, ears twitching, ready to pounce on any scurrying mouse or rat. Their presence was a natural deterrent, a furry, purring guardian of your food supply. It's hard to overstate the importance of cats in Egyptian households. They were even mummified and buried with their owners, a testament to their value both as pets and pest controllers. So, while you're trying to drift off, picture a contented cat dozing by a basket of grain, occasionally stirring to deal with a four-legged intruder. Much more soothing than a crocodile, right? Beyond the feline guardians, Egyptians also employed more direct, if sometimes messy, tactics. They might use primitive traps for rodents, perhaps simple pitfalls or snares made of reeds and rope. You'd set them out at night, hoping to catch the unwelcome guests. And for insects, especially flies and mosquitoes, they sometimes used sticky substances. Imagine dabbing a thick, sweet concoction, perhaps a kind of resin or honey, onto a surface to lure and trap insects. It's the ancient world's version of a fly trap, less a strip of paper and more a glob of goo. You'd probably clean up more than you'd like, but it was an attempt to manage the buzzing, biting hordes. Now for a quirky tidbit. Some texts suggest the use of herbal fumigants to repel insects. You might burn specific plants or resins, creating a smoke that was unpleasant to pests. Think of it as ancient incense, but with a more practical, less aromatic purpose. Perhaps you'd burn dried wormwood or coriander seeds, hoping the acrid smoke would drive out fleas or gnats. It's a bit like your modern mosquito coil, but with a more rustic, smoky aroma. Historians still argue whether the effectiveness of these herbal methods was due to actual insecticidal properties or simply the smoke and perceived magical qualities. Was it science, superstition, or a bit of both? The answer, like the smoke, tends to dissipate into the mists of time. You're constantly battling. The air, even indoors, is rarely still. The hum of insects, the rustle of straw, the distant croak of frogs from the Nile. It's a world alive with sound, much of it tiny and much of it unwelcome. So, while these methods offered some relief, the thought of something larger, more formidable, more predatory, to deal with the bigger problems might have begun to take shape in the Egyptian mind. After all, if a cat could handle mice, what could handle something even bigger? So, you've got your cats, your sticky traps, your smoky herbs, and still, the pests persist. It's enough to make you sigh deeply and wonder if there's a bigger, stronger answer out there. And in ancient Egypt, the biggest, strongest answer often came with scales and a wide, toothy grin, the crocodile. But how did a creature so inherently dangerous become something to even consider as an ally, let alone a pest controller? The answer lies in their deeply intertwined relationship with the divine. For the ancient Egyptians, the Nile crocodile wasn't just another animal. It was intrinsically linked to Sobuk, the god of the Nile, military prowess, and fertility. Sobuk was often depicted as a man with a crocodile head or as a crocodile itself, adorned with a sun disk and plumes. He was a complex deity, embodying both the fearsome power and the life-giving bounty of the Nile. Think of him as the ultimate representation of the river's unpredictable nature, capable of immense destruction, but also essential for the yearly inundation that brought forth life. You'd offer prayers and sacrifices to Sobuk, hoping to appease his more dangerous aspects and encourage his protective qualities. It's a delicate balance, trying to cajole a god who could, quite literally, snap you in half. This mainstream historical fact, the widespread worship of Sobek, is key to understanding the Egyptian psyche regarding crocodiles. Temples dedicated to Sobek, such as the famous Kamambo, housed live crocodiles, often adorned with jewels, treated with reverence, and fed choice cuts of meat. These sacred crocodiles were seen as living manifestations of the god, intermediaries between the human and divine worlds. You would gaze upon these creatures, feeling a mix of awe and trepidation, believing that their presence brought blessings to the land and its people. This reverence, this belief in their divine connection, fundamentally altered how Egyptians viewed these apex predators. They weren't just animals, they were sacred beasts, capable of both harm and protection. Now for a quirky tidbit that really highlights this duality. Ancient Egyptian texts and reliefs show instances where crocodiles were used as a form of divine oracle. Imagine presenting a question to a priest, who would then interpret the movements or behaviors of a sacred crocodile in its pool to discern the will of Sobek. Was it a flick of the tail? A slow submersion? The nuanced interpretation of these gestures could decide fates. It's a bit like trying to read tea leaves, but if the tea leaves could suddenly lunge at you. Historians still argue whether these oracle readings were genuinely believed by all, or if they were a clever way for the priesthood to maintain authority and control. Was it sincere piety or shrewd manipulation? The truth probably lies somewhere in the murky waters of human belief. So, if a creature is considered divine, if it embodies both terror and fertility, if it's revered in temples and consulted for divine guidance, then the leap to seeing it as a powerful, albeit dangerous, agent of pest control might not be as outlandish as it first seems. You're not just dealing with a pest problem, you're enlisting a living deity, a potent force of nature, to help keep your meager granary safe. A powerful thought, indeed, to drift off to. Alright, so you've got the divine connection, the awe, the respect for the crocodile as a living embodiment of Sobek. But let's be practical for a moment. How on earth do you go from worshipping a fearsome beast to actually, possibly, using it for pest control? We're not talking about casually strolling down to the Nile with a net. Catching one of these creatures, even a juvenile, would have been a monumental task, fraught with peril. You're essentially trying to gently persuade a prehistoric eating machine to come home with you. Imagine you're living near the marshier parts of the Nile, where the young crocodiles might be more accessible. You'd need a team, certainly not a solo endeavor. The traditional method for catching crocodiles, even into more modern times in some regions, often involved spears, nets, and sheer bravery. But for a smaller specimen, perhaps a juvenile, the approach might have been more about stealth and cunning. You'd probably wait during the cooler parts of the day, when they might be less active, or during the dry season when water levels were lower, exposing more of their nesting areas. You'd be looking for the telltale ripples on the water, the almost imperceptible movement in the reeds. One mainstream historical fact here is that ancient Egyptians were incredibly skilled hunters and trappers, capable of catching all manner of animals, from birds to hippopotamuses. They used sophisticated nets, snares, and even specialized hunting dogs. So, the technical capability to capture a young crocodile was certainly within their grasp. The challenge wasn't just the capture itself, but the safely getting it back to wherever you intended it to live. You'd likely need some form of strong cage or container, something sturdy enough to withstand powerful snapping jaws and thrashing tails. Think of trying to get a particularly feisty, scaly, and very bitey puppy into a carrier, but magnified by about 1,000. Now for a quirky tidbit that might make you chuckle. Some theories suggest that the ancient Egyptians might have used bait to lure younger crocodiles. Not just any bait, mind you, but perhaps something particularly enticing to a young, hungry reptile. Maybe a plump fish, or even a smaller, less desirable rodent. The thought of setting out a trap, much like you would for a rat, but then having a baby crocodile emerge from the shadows to snatch it, is wonderfully absurd. Historians still argue whether the perceived benefits of domesticating or semi-domesticating such a dangerous creature outweighed the sheer logistical nightmare and obvious personal risk involved. Was it truly a widespread practice, or more akin to a wealthy eccentric's dangerous hobby? The debate itself is rather soothing, isn't it? So, you've somehow managed to capture your scaly charge. You've got it contained, perhaps in a sturdy wooden box or a woven basket reinforced with thick leather. You're lugging it back to your mud brick home, probably sweating profusely and wondering if this was truly a good idea. The journey itself would be an adventure, a silent prayer to Sobuk that your new pest controller doesn't decide to make an early escape. And once you get it home, that's when the real fun begins. You've done it. Against all odds, you've managed to get a juvenile crocodile, perhaps a foot or two long, back to your humble mud brick dwelling. Now comes the truly perplexing part, training the untrainable beast. You're not trying to teach it to fetch your sandals, mind you, or roll over. You're attempting to instill some semblance of control over a creature whose instincts are hardwired for survival and predation. This is where the notion of training gets incredibly murky and fascinating. Think about the sheer impossibility of it. Crocodiles aren't like dogs or even cats, which can be domesticated and taught commands. They are ancient reptiles, driven by cold-blooded efficiency. So, the idea of training probably wasn't about obedience in our modern sense, but more about creating a specific environment where its natural predatory behavior could be directed or, at the very least, tolerated in a confined space. You wouldn't be teaching it to sit. You'd be hoping it wouldn't eat your chickens, or worse, your toes, while still keeping the rodent population in check. It's a fine line between pest control and becoming the pest control. One mainstream historical fact to consider here is the ancient Egyptians' remarkable understanding of animal behavior, particularly with creatures they hunted or kept. They were keen observers of the natural world, often depicting animals with stunning accuracy in their art. This deep knowledge would have informed any attempt to interact with or manage a crocodile. They knew its habits, its preferred hunting grounds, its feeding patterns. This observational skill might have led them to understand that a well-fed crocodile was less likely to go rogue, or that certain sounds or movements might agitate it less. You'd be relying on their innate understanding of the animal kingdom, rather than any formal training manuals. Now for a quirky tidbit. Some theories suggest that rather than active training, it might have been a form of imprinting or habituation. If you acquired a hatchling, perhaps orphaned, and consistently provided it with food, it might associate humans with sustenance rather than threat. It's a long shot, of course, but it's a more plausible scenario than trying to teach a fully wild juvenile to walk on a leash. Imagine feeding it a few small, annoying mice from your own stores, reinforcing the idea that these are the tasty snacks you provide. Historians still argue whether such a concept of habituation was truly understood or simply an accidental outcome of keeping such a creature. Was it a conscious strategy or just hopeful interaction? The quiet contemplation of such an idea should be quite relaxing. You'd create a designated space for it, perhaps a small, enclosed pool or a section of a courtyard with access to water. The goal wouldn't be to have it roam freely, but to confine it to an area where its natural predatory instincts could be beneficial. Maybe it's a pond near your grain storage, or a section of your garden where rodents and snakes are a persistent problem. You're essentially building a very specialized, very dangerous, and potentially very effective living mousetrap. And you're just hoping it sticks to the script. So, you've got your, hopefully, habituated juvenile crocodile, confined to its designated area. Let's say a specially constructed pond near your granary, or a section of the irrigation ditch that runs near your fields. Now comes the moment of truth. Seeing your little scaly friend, your new pest patrol, in action. You're not expecting it to march around with a tiny shield, but rather to simply exist in its space, allowing its natural instincts to do the job. Imagine the scenario. It's twilight, the air cooling, and the small, furry creatures of the night begin to stir. A rat, perhaps, bold from the day's quiet, scuttles out from the shadows, sniffing around the edges of your stored grain. It's making its way, unaware, towards the very water source that now harbors your living, breathing pest solution. The crocodile, a dark shape in the dim light, senses the vibration, the movement. There's a sudden, swift ripple on the water's surface, a barely audible splash, and then silence. The rat, presumably, is no longer a problem. You might hear the quiet crunch of tiny bones, but you try not to dwell on that part. It's efficient, if a little unsettling. One mainstream historical fact to anchor this vision. Ancient Egyptian granaries were vital to their survival, and protecting them from pests was a constant struggle. These large, Often cylindrical structures were built to store vast quantities of grain, sometimes with elevated floors to deter rodents. But even with these measures, pests found a way in. The idea of introducing a predator, even a dangerous one, into the immediate vicinity of such a crucial resource highlights the desperate need for effective pest control. You're putting your trust, and a small part of your sanity, into the jaws of a reptile. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some accounts suggest that these pest patrol crocodiles might have also deterred snakes. A snake, seeking warmth or prey, might slither too close to the water, only to find itself face-to-face with a much larger, more aggressive reptile. It's a bit like setting a cat out for mice, but if the cat could also take on a boa constrictor. The effectiveness of this would, of course, depend on the size of the crocodile and the snake, but the possibility adds another layer to this unusual strategy. Historians still argue whether the primary target for these crocodiles was rodents, or if their presence was more broadly deterrent for a range of smaller pests and even larger, unwelcome creatures. Was it a multi-purpose solution, or simply a hopeful guess? The lack of detailed pest control manuals from ancient Egypt keeps the debate alive, allowing your mind to wander peacefully. You might not see it happen every time, but the absence of scurrying sounds, the lack of chewed grain, becomes the quiet proof of your scaly helper's work. You just hope that the crocodile remains focused on its designated work and doesn't decide to expand its menu to include, say, your prize-winning chickens, or, heaven forbid, a curious child. It's a gamble, certainly, but in a world without modern pesticides, sometimes the riskiest solutions were the most tempting. And as you drift off, you can almost hear the gentle slurping sounds of a satisfied predator. So, you've got your scaly guardian, diligently, you hope, munching on any rodents foolish enough to wander into its designated pest control zone. But even a juvenile crocodile, doing its important job, still needs sustenance. And this isn't just about throwing at a rat whenever one appears. You need to consistently feed your unusual pet, lest it decide that you look like a particularly plump and slow-moving meal. This brings us to the rather delicate logistical challenge of feeding your scaly companion. Imagine you're out fishing in the Nile, perhaps with a simple fishing net or a hook and line. You're not just catching dinner for your family. You're also thinking about your crocodilian colleague. Fish would undoubtedly be a primary food source for a juvenile crocodile. It's a natural part of their diet in the wild, and relatively easy for an Egyptian living by the river to procure. So, you'd be tossing in fish, perhaps the smaller, less desirable catches, keeping your mini predator content and focused on its job. It's a bit like owning a particularly demanding, toothy cat, but instead of finicky kibble, it prefers whole, wriggling fish. One mainstream historical fact here is the abundance of fish in the Nile, which was a crucial protein source for ancient Egyptians. Fishing was a common occupation, and various techniques, from nets to harpoons, were employed. This ready availability of fish made the idea of sustaining a captive aquatic predator far more feasible than if they had to hunt land animals specifically for it. You wouldn't be sacrificing your precious livestock. You'd be utilizing a plentiful resource from the river itself. Now for a quirky tidbit that might make you ponder. Some theories suggest that if a crocodile was indeed used for pest control in a domestic setting, it might have been occasionally fed the actual pests it caught. Imagine tossing a particularly brazen rat, freshly caught from your granary, directly to your crocodile. This would serve a dual purpose, providing food and reinforcing the idea that these are the creatures it should be targeting. It's a grisly thought, perhaps, but quite efficient in a macabre sort of way. Historians still argue whether such a direct feed the pest to the predator system was ever consciously implemented, or if the crocodiles simply did their job and ate what they caught without human intervention. Was it a deliberate strategy, or just the natural course of events? The gentle hum of the debate should be quite soporific. The daily ritual of feeding would also be a crucial part of maintaining that delicate habituation we talked about earlier. Consistent, predictable feeding from a human source could further solidify the idea that you are not prey, but rather the provider. You'd approach cautiously, perhaps with a long stick to toss the fish, maintaining a respectful distance. It's a constant, low-level negotiation with a primal instinct, ensuring your pest controller remains your ally and not your next problem. As you picture this scene, the soft splash of fish hitting water, the silent gulp, you might find yourself drifting further and further into a peaceful sleep. While the idea of a crocodile as a pest controller is certainly the most striking, it's important to remember that ancient Egyptians had other, perhaps more conventional, animal allies in their battle against pests. You didn't put all your eggs in one reptilian basket, so to speak. These other creatures often worked in conjunction with, or as alternatives to, the more exotic solutions. The domesticated cat, which we touched upon earlier, remains a mainstream historical fact as arguably the most widespread and effective form of pest control in ancient Egypt. You would cherish your cat not just for its companionship, but for its silent, deadly efficiency in hunting mice and rats. Their sleek forms, often depicted in tomb paintings, show their importance in daily life. Imagine a quiet evening, the sun setting, and your family cat, Bastet's own, emerges from the shadows to patrol the corners of your home. It's a familiar and comforting scene, far less nerve-wracking than sharing your living space with something that could, on a bad day, remove a limb. Beyond cats, another important animal ally was the ibis. This elegant wading bird, with its long, curved beak, was sacred to Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing. Ibis birds were prolific hunters of snakes, scorpions, and various insects. You'd see them wading through the marshes or even walking through fields, their keen eyes spotting movement in the tall grasses. While you wouldn't keep an ibis inside your home, their presence in the surrounding agricultural lands provided a natural barrier against many pests that might otherwise venture into your dwelling. It's a bit like having a natural perimeter defense system, a feathered, long-legged guard. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some texts mention the use of weasels or ferrets for rodent control, particularly in granaries. These smaller, more agile carnivores could squeeze into tight spaces where cats might not fit, rooting out hidden nests of mice and rats. Imagine a slinky, swift hunter darting through piles of grain, eliminating the problem directly at its source. Historians still argue whether the use of weasels was widespread or more localized to specific regions or wealthy estates. Was it a common practice among farmers, or a specialized solution for larger storage facilities? The debate itself is rather quiet, a gentle whisper in the annals of history, perfect for helping you drift off. The strategic deployment of these animal allies, whether through domestication or by simply encouraging their presence in the environment, shows a nuanced understanding of natural pest control. You didn't just rely on brute force. You understood the intricate web of life and how to leverage it to your advantage. While a crocodile might have been a dramatic, high-stakes option, the steady, reliable work of cats, ibises, and perhaps even weasels formed the backbone of ancient Egyptian pest management. And as you picture these animals going about their quiet work, you might find yourself settling deeper into your pillow. Beyond the everyday annoyances of rodents and insects, ancient Egypt had a particularly chilling pest to contend with: snakes. You're living in a land where venomous serpents are a very real and present danger, lurking in the shadows, under rocks, or even making their way into your home. A bite could mean agonizing pain, paralysis, or even death. So, while a crocodile might seem overkill for a mere mouse, its potential role in snake control takes on a whole new, albeit still terrifying, dimension. Imagine the relief, perhaps, if your designated reptilian guardian could also deter or eliminate these slithering threats. While it's unlikely an ancient Egyptian would deliberately introduce a large, venomous cobra to their crocodile's enclosure for a dramatic show, the simple presence of a crocodile in a body of water or a confined area could naturally discourage snakes. Snakes, particularly aquatic ones or those seeking water, would be wary of venturing into territory patrolled by an apex predator like a crocodile. It's a bit like trying to casually stroll into a lion's den for a snack. Most creatures, even venomous ones, prefer to avoid becoming someone else's meal. One mainstream historical fact that highlights the Egyptian preoccupation with snakes is their presence in mythology and iconography. The cobra, in particular, was a powerful symbol, revered and feared, representing protection and royalty. Think of the uraeus on pharaohs' crowns. Yet, despite their symbolic power, they were still a deadly threat in daily life. Charms, spells, and even snake charmers were employed to deal with these creatures, indicating a widespread concern about their presence. Now for a quirky tidbit, some ancient Egyptian households actually kept mongooses as pets, specifically for their prowess in hunting snakes. These quick, Agile mammals are famously immune to certain snake venoms and are natural predators of serpents. So while a crocodile might have been a large-scale deterrent for an area, a mongoose could be your nimble, domestic snake assassin. Imagine the little mongoose darting around your home, fearlessly engaging with a cobra that might have slithered in. It's a delightful, if slightly dangerous, form of natural pest control. Historians still argue whether the primary role of domesticated mongooses was indeed snake control, or if they were simply exotic pets that occasionally performed this valuable service. Was it intentional pest management, or a happy accident? The silent slithering of these historical questions continues to intrigue. So, whether through the grand, intimidating presence of a crocodile near a water source, or the nimble, fearless actions of a mongoose within the home, ancient Egyptians found various ways to combat the pervasive threat of snakes. You're not just dealing with the visible pests, you're managing the unseen dangers, the quiet threats that could turn a peaceful night into a nightmare. As you ponder the delicate balance of these ancient ecosystems, you might find your own thoughts settling into a quiet rhythm, ready for sleep. You've made a rather bold choice, haven't you? You've decided to live with a creature that could, under different circumstances, easily see you as prey. This brings us squarely to the risks and rewards of reptile roommates. Because let's be honest, while the idea of a living, breathing pest deterrent is appealing, the potential downsides are considerable. The most obvious risk, a mainstream historical fact, is the inherent danger of keeping a crocodile. These are powerful, wild animals with incredibly strong jaws and a bite force that makes a modern-day bear trap look like a gentle hug. Even a juvenile, once it grows, can be a serious threat. You're always one wrong move away from a very bad day. A lapse in judgment, a misstep, or simply the crocodile having a particularly grumpy moment, and suddenly, you're not the one benefiting from pest control. It's a constant, low-level hum of anxiety, knowing you're cohabiting with a creature that could, theoretically, decide your foot looks like a tasty fish. But then, there are the rewards, which must have been significant enough to even contemplate such a daring arrangement. The primary benefit, of course, is the effective reduction of pests. Imagine the sheer relief of having fewer rats gnawing through your grain, fewer mice contaminating your food, and fewer snakes slithering into your sleeping quarters. In a world without widespread pesticides or effective trapping methods, a living predator could offer a level of protection that was simply unattainable otherwise. It's a trade-off, constant vigilance for a tangible improvement in hygiene and food preservation. Now for a quirky tidbit. There's anecdotal evidence from later periods in some regions that crocodiles kept near wells or water sources were believed to also deter waterborne parasites or even thieves. The sheer intimidating presence of a crocodile might make anyone think twice before trying to pilfer water or sneak into a property under cover of darkness. It's a natural, scaly alarm system that doubles as a terrifying bouncer. Historians still argue whether the fear factor played a larger role in their perceived utility than their actual pest-eating capabilities. Was it more about psychological deterrence, or truly about their predatory effectiveness? The slow, deliberate movements of a crocodile, even in your mind's eye, should be quite calming now. You're weighing the constant threat against the undeniable benefits. The quiet nights, the intact grain, the fewer scorpions, these are powerful incentives. But the cost is a perpetual state of awareness, a never-ending assessment of the creature's mood. It's a testament to the ingenuity and perhaps desperation of ancient peoples that they would even consider such a volatile solution. As you imagine this uneasy truce, you can feel the subtle tension in the air, slowly fading as you drift into a deep, peaceful sleep. Given the sheer audacity of keeping a crocodile as a pest controller, you might be wondering, do we have any actual proof of this? Or is it just another fascinating, but ultimately unfounded, theory born from late-night historical musings? This brings us to the archaeological clues and scholarly theories that attempt to either confirm or refute this peculiar practice. One mainstream historical fact is the discovery of mummified crocodiles in various ancient Egyptian sites, particularly at Kam Ombo, the temple dedicated to Sobuk. While many of these mummified crocodiles were undoubtedly sacred animals, offerings to the god, or part of ritualistic practices, their sheer number and the careful way they were preserved indicate a deep and complex relationship between Egyptians and these reptiles. You might find some crocodiles mummified alongside their human keepers, suggesting a bond that went beyond mere fear or worship. Does this prove they were pest controllers? Not definitively, but it certainly opens the door to the idea that some crocodiles were kept in closer proximity to humans than we might initially imagine. Archaeologists have also unearthed crocodile eggs and juvenile crocodile remains in contexts that are not strictly temple-related, but rather closer to domestic or agricultural settlements. You might find these remains in ancient refuse pits or in the vicinity of older farmsteads. This suggests that young crocodiles were, at times, brought into human-inhabited areas. The question then becomes why. Was it for food, for pets, or for some practical purpose like pest control? The context of these finds often sparks intense scholarly debate. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some very early Egyptian texts and depictions show instances of Egyptians interacting with crocodiles in ways that seem less adversarial and more symbiotic. Imagine a faded carving showing a figure seemingly managing or leading a small crocodile, perhaps by a rudimentary tether. While these interpretations are highly speculative and often contested, they do hint at a more nuanced relationship than just simple fear. Historians still argue whether these depictions represent attempts at training or managing crocodiles for practical purposes, or if they are purely symbolic representations of power over nature, or perhaps even a form of early zookeeping. The lack of explicit crocodile pest control manuals means we're left piecing together tantalizing fragments, much like trying to understand a dream just as you wake up. So, while there isn't a definitive smoking gun, no papyrus scroll titled How to Train Your Pest Croc, the collective weight of the evidence, from mummified remains to cryptic depictions, continues to fuel the quiet debate. You're left to consider the possibilities, to ponder the ancient mind and its unique solutions as you drift further into peaceful rest. So, whether they were truly pest controllers or just very intimidating pets, the Nile crocodile's presence is an enduring thread in the tapestry of ancient Egyptian life. You see them depicted on temple walls, invoked in prayers, and their mummified forms speak volumes about their sacred status. Their legacy, however, extends far beyond the dusty ruins of temples. These magnificent reptiles continue to thrive in the Nile today, their ancient lineage unbroken. One mainstream historical fact is that the Nile crocodile, Crocodilus niloticus, remains one of the largest freshwater predators in Africa. They are incredibly long-lived, powerful, and perfectly adapted to their riverine environment. Their survival across millennia, through countless changes in climate and human civilization, is a testament to their evolutionary success. You can still spot them basking on sandbanks, their prehistoric eyes scanning the waters, much as they did thousands of years ago when pharaohs walked the land. It's a remarkable continuity, a living link to the very world we've been exploring. Their enduring presence means that while their relationship with humans has evolved, from sacred deity and potential pest controller to a creature to be largely avoided or protected, the crocodile itself remains a potent symbol of the Nile's wild, untamed power. You might now view them from a distance, perhaps from a tour boat, rather than considering them for household chores, but their sheer scale and ancient wisdom still command respect. Now for a quirky tidbit. In some modern-day communities along the Nile, especially in more remote areas, there are still traditional beliefs and stories that speak of crocodiles with an almost human-like intelligence or even a capacity for loyalty to specific individuals or families. These aren't necessarily about pest control, but they echo the ancient reverence and complex relationship. Imagine old tales whispered around a campfire of a particular crocodile known to guard a certain stretch of river, or of fishermen who leave offerings to the local crocs for a safe passage. Historians still argue whether these contemporary folklores are direct descendants of ancient Egyptian beliefs, or if they are independent cultural developments reflecting universal human awe and fear of such powerful animals. The answer, like the slow current of the Nile, meanders through time. The Nile crocodile is more than just a survivor. It's a living monument to the past, a creature that has witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the ebb and flow of civilizations. Its powerful jaws, its ancient eyes, its silent glide through the water, all resonate with the long history we've been exploring. And as you picture this timeless predator, a whisper of ancient ingenuity and the deep connection between humans and nature, you can feel yourself sinking deeper into a calm, dreamless sleep. So, we've journeyed through the sun-drenched landscapes of ancient Egypt, explored the daily battles against pests, and even contemplated the truly wild idea of inviting a crocodile to help out. You've imagined the smells, the sounds, the subtle anxieties, and the quiet triumphs of a world both familiar and utterly alien. And as we bring this slow historical drift to a close, it's time to truly let those images fade and embrace the quiet that surrounds you. You've learned about the ingenious, and sometimes peculiar, ways humans adapted to their environments, leveraging the natural world, even its most dangerous inhabitants, to solve their problems. From the beloved domesticated cats purring away rodent worries to the perhaps mythical, perhaps real, juvenile crocodiles providing a toothy deterrent, the ingenuity was boundless. We considered the sacred role of Sobuk, the logistical challenges of capturing and feeding such a creature, and the constant risks versus rewards of living with a living predator. Historians still argue about the true extent of these practices, the precise methods, and the exact motivations. Was it widespread? Was it rare? Was it more about ritual or practicality? These are the soft whispers of academic debate that echo gently through the quiet halls of libraries, questions that don't demand immediate answers, but rather invite peaceful contemplation. And that contemplation, that gentle unspooling of thought, is precisely what we're aiming for tonight. The ancient world, with all its fascinating oddities, is now settling into a peaceful stillness in your mind. The sounds of the Nile are fading, the scent of papyrus is dissipating, and the distant, rhythmic croak of a frog is becoming softer and softer. You are not in ancient Egypt. You are safe, comfortable, and warm in your own bed. Let the last images of the Nile's slow, deliberate current wash over you. The smooth, dark surface of the water reflecting the moonlight. The faint rustle of reeds in a gentle breeze. The quiet breathing of the ancient land itself. There's no more need to battle pests, no more need to ponder dangerous solutions. Just the profound calm of a story well told, now gently receding into the mists of sleep. Your mind, full of curious facts and peculiar scenarios, is now perfectly primed for a deep and restorative rest. Let your muscles relax, your breathing deepen, and your thoughts become as still as the water of the Nile on a windless night. There's nothing left to do but surrender to the tranquility.